Hey, good morning. Welcome to Product Coffee. I am Jason Brett, and this is our weekly virtual meetup of product people from all around the world. We drink coffee and talk product management stuff. So this morning, we're going to kick off with some literary hot takes before we dive into PRDs and AI. But let's talk about what's worth reading and what's worth recycling. First up, let's meet our first cup panelist. If Requirements had a referee, he'd be wearing the stripes. That's John Field, Vice President of Product Management at Tallagy, here in the studio with me today. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, everybody.
Next up, he wrangles AI like most of us wrangle inboxes. It's Misha Sulpovar, Vice President of AI Products at Cherry and founder of Prompt Owl. Welcome, Misha. This guy brings swagger, sarcasm, and spot-on advice. He's our very own Han Solo of product, Steve Johnson, CEO of Product Growth Leaders. And last but certainly not least, she's proof that curiosity is a superpower, our own book club curator, Allison Herbert. Welcome back, Allison. All right, let's get started. So every week, we hit the first thing. Our panel gives their hot take on the world of product management, marketing, and innovation, and then it's your turn. So turn on your cameras and join us in the conversation. Okay, so I'm going to get started with this, and I'm just going to, first, I'm going to go straight to John, and I'm going to say, hey, John, so the prompt that I set up, and I sent this to everybody, and I really was interested in your take. We've talked about this a few times over the last several months and years. What is the book or article that has had the biggest impact on how you approach your craft recently, that you've read recently? And what's the so-called must-read that secretly drives you nuts? So, John, take it away.
So it's interesting, right? Because you asked the one that drives me that I've read recently. And so I have to color outside the lines a little bit because I've read this book multiple times in my career, and it's old, but it is Crossing the Chasm. I like to work not at the lower, like the early stages of the startup. I mean, I've started and worked at companies that had 8 people and they don't have a product team, but I really like to work in the companies that are scaling, companies that are around that $100 million kind of mark, and they're trying to figure out how to get to 2 or 3. Those are the ones that I enjoy. And so for me, Crossing the Chasm, the original book has examples of like how Excel took over Lotus 1, 2, 3. So for those that are on the call, they're like, I know that software. Then welcome to midlife, to old age. We are all there. Most of some of the initial product managers have no idea what Lotus 1, 2, 3 is.
Right.
They have never laid one of those things across the top of the keyboard to remember the function keys.
Yeah, the little keyboard template.
Yeah, I am so dating myself. But I see I got smiles on the video, so I'm not doing too bad. But that's probably the one that I just read over and over again, where it talks about, right, the features for the first innovators and early adopters are not what you need to get the early majority and late majority and laggards. And so how do you think about not just continuing down the same roadmap, but being able to think about the problem differently to really expand the market into people that maybe aren't as technology oriented as some of your initial customers are?
That's a great one. I hadn't read that in so long. That's Jeffrey Moore, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, Crossing the Chasm.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Written in the late 80s.
Yeah. When I was first hearing Guns N' Roses. Awesome. That's a great one. How about the one that is like fingernails on a chalkboard? It's just so overrated you want to toss it.
This is a hot take.
I'm ready for it.
I am not a lean startup fan. I am not. I like thinking things out a little bit more. I like having more of that strategy. Again, maybe if I was in that early space, I would like the lean startup, but it's one where I think that sometimes we overdo MVPs in product and we lean too far towards engineering milestones as opposed to something that is actually a product that someone other than an innovator or early adopter would use.
Yeah.
And so I just not a big lean startup fan.
That makes a ton of sense. We had a really good conversation about MVP and the misapplication of it just a couple weeks ago, and that's a really good hot take. I'm not offended. I definitely have that kind of same love. I have a love-hate relationship with the lean startup. There's definitely a lot of strength to it, but I think the MVP side of it and that not every company is a 0 to 1 startup that is trying to figure out their business model, and that's what a lot of the lean startup is trying to figure out your business model. Once you've got it, a lot of that stuff just doesn't apply anymore. That's cool. All right, so Misha, I'm going to go to you next. What's the most impactful read you've had for a little while?
The AI 2027 research piece is a
Wait,
group.
huh?
Yeah.
2027?
So if you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. It's I don't know if you call it an article or a research paper or what. It's AI-2027.com, but it's a group of researchers that have laid out 2 possible scenarios for the advancement of AI over the next 2 years, and it's a really humbling read. And one effectively ends very, very poorly, and one ends equally as dystopian but less poorly. But I think it's one of those things where what I find useful about it specifically is that, the plan is useless, right? Planning is everything. I think that kind of mindset is where my head's been at over the last few months, because I have seen so much evolution, especially with agents,
Yeah.
that it's become impossible to ignore.
So are you kind of feeling a little bit more pessimism these days, or?
I don't know that I would call it pessimism. I'm feeling that the emphasis we need to be placing right now in our mental models is around conscious application of responsibility and safety and context design above all else. And I think it's gonna be really important as we move forward and these things get more and more capable.
All right. Well, thanks. I have not heard of that one. I'm looking forward to going and reading that. How about your recycle bin worthy book or article?
Recycle bin. You know what? I'll actually call them the same thing, because I think that they'll sort of poke holes at the same bit,
Oh,
but
nice.
it's hard to tell what prognostications are going to make sense or not. But there's a insular bubble in the valley around AI startups, and there's a consensus around the dystopian future. And the thing that stands in the way there is people's behavior, the moats people put up, and how fast we want to go, and then the theoretical limits of the hardware we have. That I tweeter a little bit back and forth on how much to lean in to the narrative from the West Coast versus the East Coast.
Okay. All right. Cool. So just as kind of a real quick follow-on question for you, Misha. In general, what makes a piece of writing stick for you in practice? What when you come across something that really sticks and it becomes quotable for you, what is it generally that makes something stick for you?
For me,
Yeah.
so I actually really hate business books, if I'm honest. I remember in business school, I was interested in consulting, and I asked the dean at the time, who I had a great amount of respect for, like, what should I be reading? And if I'm interested in exploring the space, strategy consulting or whatever it is, and he said, go read Dostoevsky. And I think that makes perfect sense, and maybe a good reference for the time. But there's something about fiction and how fiction writers think about narrating human behavior that I find a lot more compelling than the business book formula, which you can condense in 10 pages and throw away the rest most of the time.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Thank you so much. So let's pivot over to Steve Johnson. Steve, tell me about your most impactful recent read that is not sci-fi.
Here we go. Before we do, I thought I would agree with Misha. When I was writing my own book, I thought I put in like a part 2 that just said, this is the part of the book where everybody repeats everything they've already said, and then just have it be 1 page, intentionally left blank. But I thought it would be a joke that only I would appreciate. But anyway, the book that I'm most taken with at the moment, I just finished reading a book called From Project to Product Mode. And I don't know the authors at all. I was so taken by it. I put it in my newsletter and they're like, dude, who are you? But I've I find as I work with teams, they're still struggling with product orientation in their thinking. I mean, they're still, even though they say they're, doing outcomes over outputs and, they're saying all the right things, but still executives and salespeople and marketing teams are all saying, where's your Gantt chart? I still need to know what you're going to ship 9 months from now. And this book really kind of explained that product managers are in product mode, but they're surrounded by people who are still thinking project. And so they had some really good examples in the book and really left quite an impression on me. Strong recommendation. The other one, a little bit older, that I wanted to share, if you haven't read it, it's fabulous. And that's The Unicorn Project by Gene Kim. He also wrote a book called The Phoenix Project, and they're like parallel novels of dysfunctional companies. And there was one passage in particular that I point people to, where the product manager goes to work at one of their client stores and goes through, new employee orientation and is just shocked at how outdated everything is. And to give you a little more context, in the novel, the company is internal, a digital IT organization that builds software for their retail stores, and they sell car parts, right? So in orientation, he says, okay, the first thing you do is you take your Post-it note and your pen, and you go out and write down the VIN off the number of the car, right? And then you come back in and go over these books, and you flip to, the appropriate page, and the product manager is just freaking out, like, it's the 21st century. What the hell is going on here? And it reminds me so much about how most product managers don't have that visceral experience of living the life of their customer. And another similar thing is, in the past, so many developers have said to me, well, it works fine on my computer. I'm like, well, we're not selling your computer, are we? Our customers are on a 1080p laptop from 7 years ago, and you've got two 30-inch monitors with high-speed internet. Our customer environment is so very different than your own, and it's the Unicorn Project really, well, yeah, the Unicorn Project really is a visceral way of showing that you really don't know what your customer experience is until you've been in the customer experience.
All right. Got to check both those out. Oh, get your rant button on. Get your rant button ready. I am ready to hear about the one that is overblown, that is that is your favorite one to throw away.
I know this is going to be confrontational. I love Marty Cagan's writing, but I don't think Inspired is a very good primer for product managers. And when I'm on Reddit, somebody says, hey, I'm getting into product management. What should I read? And everybody goes, get Inspired, and I remember reading it going, hey, I agree with this. I agree with this, but it's not a practical book. It's a theoretical book, basically. And I love the theory of it all. I love his writing. I love his point of view. I love the idea of the trio. A lot of this, literally everything I think I've read by him, I appreciate, but I don't consider Inspired to be the first book to read that everybody recommends. Mm-hmm. I think in many cases it's more like fantasy fiction. You read this and go, oh, is that what it would be like to work for a company that isn't full of it?
Yep. I was not surprised to hear that one. I agree with you. It's a great book about the philosophy of how things ought to be.
Right.
But
right. And I err that way too. I like to tell people how things ought to be, but still, give me some practical tips on how I can live in my reality.
And even Transformed, which he wrote, and the stated purpose was to help give people a better roadmap to getting there. It was really more a book of proof points that some companies had gotten there. It was, mm-hmm. This company made that evolution. But didn't. It still didn't give you the consulting view of how to get there. One of the interesting things about Marty and his work, and that I really appreciate, is that everything they write about, it's literally what they're observing out in their clients. They're going out and they're looking at what their clients are doing and saying, this is where we're learning product management, what works and doesn't work, and how we're writing about it. And that's great. I really like paint by numbers though, please, Marty. So
In that vein, I was doing a training many years ago, and there was an older guy. And for me to say older, I know that's a significant statement. But anyway, he was sitting there with his arms crossed most of the time. And at the end, I said, okay, well, what are we going to do differently tomorrow? And he's like, nothing. Management won't let me. And I'm like, seriously? I mean, management actively prevents you from creating a persona document and sharing it with your developers. Management prevents you from telling them a real actual story about a customer and their problem. And I think he had just surrendered. It was like, they want me to be a feature factory, so I'll be a feature factory, and screw it, I'll write user stories all day long, even though they're all nonsense.
Yep.
But I feel like in many ways we need to be teaching, here's what should be, or here's what goodness looks like, and here's the path to get there, considering that virtually everybody seems to be in some sort of dysfunctional organization.
All right. Well, thanks, Steve. All right, let's head over to the librarian and talk to Allison. Allison reads a lot of books, so I'm sure she's got plenty to draw from. So tell us, what has been your favorite recent that's been really impactful for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw you a curveball because I'm sure you're all expecting some business or product book for me to chime in here because it's my job for the product folks. But what has my attention recently is a book called Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And so I am on a journey to take a little less stress out of my day-to-day life. We know product folks are very busy, oftentimes very precious, and our regular lives are hard things to hold into balance. So I enjoyed this book because it gave me an opportunity to find a way into meditation that wasn't like, oh, I must sit in lotus pose for 30 minutes every day until the world's aligned and say it's okay to go out in the world. It's very practicable. Each chapter is a day basically, and it's less than 10 minutes of a read. So you can do it on a walk, you can do it, as you're getting ready for the day or whatever. And he says up front, like, you don't have to remember any of this. What sticks with you, and that's what should guide you in your practice. So I really love that. It has helped me adopt a just over 5-month daily meditation practice. And I have seen myself and I have seen others say, I notice a difference. So maybe I do need 30 minutes every day because of the person I am, but it's definitely making a difference in my work right now.
Excellent. So you feel like it is making a difference to really create that sense and feeling of balance.
Yep. And I need that, especially in a very busy business space. Yesterday, we have an expression at work called up on 2 wheels. I don't know if I had any wheels on the ground yesterday. So that happens regularly across the week. And so just finding a way to say, hold on, wait a minute, take a deep breath, and then go forward.
I am picturing Knight Rider, the kit car, up on 2 wheels, hitting a ramp and flying into the air at in Allison's office. All right.
It feels like that sometimes for sure.
And okay, and how about your love to hate it book?
I do not want to answer this question, but I am very glad that I'm the last person to go. As the librarian, I feel like it's making enemies of friends or picking your least favorite children. So I'll give you a semi non-answer, and I suspect that this will resonate with a few of the folks that answered already, but a book that teaches a framework that isn't practical. There are several on the shelf behind me. I think we have talked about some of them in book club before. And so I won't call anybody out by name because I realize the effort and time it takes to write a book. And I think there's something to be said about that. But if you can't take it and put it to the people, what good did you do? And some of that is the people problem, but some of that also is like as Steve kind of said, I'm out of touch with the audience. And I think as product folks, we've got to be in touch with our audience to say, how does that land? There are folks with really great books that we regularly reference in this community that I'm like, that's not practical here. I cannot take that to my office. It will fall
I
over
see.
flat on its face.
So it's a function of the book of a book's applicability in a variety of circumstances. So
I don't know that you need to be everything to everyone, but don't tell me that you can write an OKR by doing these 3 steps in every instance and organization that you meet. I've yet to find an OKR that actually survives any organization. I use that as it's an easy example. I know OKRs have hot takes and lots of feelings there. MVPs also, I think we talked about that recently. Several folks have written great MVP books or have great thoughts about MVPs, but the feasibility of taking that to an organization where people are at play, I think is where we get lost in the sauce. And so that's the part that I would just call out more so than the actual, this book is evil or is in my trash can. They're on my shelf.
That's very fair. So let me ask you specifically the flip of that question, because you've got
Yep.
some
Get an extra one for not answering. Thank you.
Right. Well, absolutely. No good deed goes unpunished. No, you made a really great point about framework books that are not easily applicable. It gives you a conceptual framework that you can't necessarily take anything actionable away from. So,
Mhm.
what about the flip side then? Is there a framework or a book that you have found exceedingly useful, so that defies that distaste? It says this one actually worked for me.
I don't know that I can point to one end to end that does it. Maybe Teresa's book comes closest.
Yeah, that's a good solid one.
I have also seen a poor OST go sideways. The very first time I saw one stood up, it got bad. It got real bad real fast. So I say that in the same lovingly manner of it has done great work for discovery, but there's still some opportunity to be had there. I really enjoyed how practical Josh and Jeff made Who Does What by How Much, back on my OKR book or rant. I think there's some opportunity there that actually made it practical. I also think there were parts of the framework and or have these meetings and do these things that not everybody could take to their place of business because their organization isn't set up that way, or folks are like, I've got a director of engineering that won't adhere to that or things of that nature. So there's opportunities, I think, with any framework. But when they're just do these things, shout it from the mountain, maybe a little nod to Marty and his way of communicating, like shout it from the mountain, therefore it must be that, if you can't take it to folks as they're practicing today, that really is a risk. So I think there's opportunities in every framework I've seen. Teresa probably does it good or the best. From what I've seen people completely bastardize that though. And I've seen people bastardize OKRs. So it's really hard to just pick one. I'm not going to do it, Jason. Give me all the questions.
We're going to move you into a consulting role.
Maybe.
No, that was great. I really appreciate that and valued that. I am shocked. I thought we were going to whip through this and bring a bunch of people from our audience into the discussion on this. I'm sorry we didn't get through it. This was a fantastic start to the day, though. I do want to ask you, if you're sitting here on the Zoom call or if you're watching us on YouTube, drop your favorites. Give us your rose and your thorn. Let me know, what is the book or article, either one is fine, maybe it's a post, that has most impacted how you relate to your craft most recently, and then what's the one that you think is just super overrated and not nearly as valuable as the prevailing winds might say that they are. I'd love your opinion on that. You can drop it in the chat here in Zoom, or you can drop it in the chat and comments there on YouTube as well. Welcome to Product Coffee. My name is Jason Brett, and today we've got a really fun discussion for you. I was sitting with my friends John and Misha a few weeks ago, and we started this conversation just a little bit on the idea of how their different organizations are managing requirements, who are taking opportunities and vision and documentation to the development teams that they're working with, and how they're kind of building up their cases for the work that needs to be done. And I thought it'd be a lot of fun to take that as the foundation for a conversation and just talk in a larger scale about requirements and PRDs and how AI and things like AI-powered prototyping are impacting how we communicate in our organization, as both with our stakeholders and with our teams, about what's important, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. So I want to kick it off with Misha, who I think I think you were talking about a company that you had come across, and I won't name the company, where you were aware that the CEO was doing a lot of vibe coding in that company and building product prototypes and throwing them over the wall. So we had a really rich discussion about that as well. But I think more importantly, I want to talk about how you and your team are thinking about requirements and software specification today.
Yeah, it's so funny because you would have asked me maybe 5 years ago what I think about documentation in general, and I would have taken a lowercase agile stance and been a fervent supporter of as little documentation as possible, right? Conversation over documentation. So if you know me, now I want to throw things on a whiteboard and facilitate discussion, and that breeds innovation. And things have really shifted, like in the utility of documentation, right? As we've started to lean into thinking about how we develop software, how we develop requirements and understand needs, not as single thread, but as a way to like allocate to different AIs, different parts of the task. It's really important that those AIs have the information they need, and that starts to come down to artifact development. It doesn't hurt that, well, maybe it does, but it's also become a lot easier to generate that. And as long as you've got the attention and the wherewithal to think through whether or not the documentation you have is appropriate, then that becomes a very powerful tool. And so the workflows that have started to emerge for me, and what I'm seeing is different folks are developing different workflows, is as we think about new features and we think about new products, how do we start with the research? And how do we use AI to generate the research and use the artifacts from that research? And if you have the luxury of a UXR, even better. But take some of that research and then start to distill it into different contexts, into different artifacts and different documents. And eventually you get to something that looks like a PRD, something that looks like a design document, something that looks like a piece by piece slice of how you want that prototype to lay out, and you sort of align it with the way you'd expect an AI to perform best. And then you feed those requirements piece by piece to whatever tools are doing either the prototyping, or in the case where you have a development team that's actually using AI agents to build like a Claude Code style environment, then what you're doing is actively deploying those artifacts and potentially even sometimes persisting them and into the context of the solution. And the results are so much better. I mean, it's incredible. It's the results you get from starting with, hey, build me a marketing site for XYZ or a CRM, to going to a different tool and saying, I need to understand what a CRM is going to look like for these users. Okay. I need to understand what the journey is going to be specifically for this job to be done for this user. I need to take this job, translate it into a ERD, into a design document, into PRDs. I need to take a slice of that and feed it back to the tool, and I get a completely different outcome. I get something that looks a lot more mature and less like a toy, or less like something that I threw together in Figma. So I think this is an evolving state. And the guy that played AlphaGo when Go won, I don't know if you remember that guy. He said it was like playing with an alien. It made completely unpredictable moves, although it won. There's a little bit of that, right? It's obviously the documentation, I think, evolves, but I think it's become more important than it's ever been in my career.
So one of the things that you said there is that the results you're getting organizationally are so much better. And can you tell me a little bit about how you're quantifying the better? What are the actual outcomes that you're saying, wow, we couldn't have gotten there this well the old way of doing things?